It was a Tuesday in June, and I was standing in my own kitchen with 2 glasses of wine in my hands. 9:40 at night. My fiancée was out on the back patio with her best friend, going over the seating chart for our wedding, and I had gone inside for the bottle. That's all. I was gone from that patio for maybe 90 seconds. The door was open about 4 inches. The porch light out there has never worked right, so we always left it cracked to hear each other. And through those 4 inches, I heard the woman I was going to marry in 11 days say something to her best friend that I have not been able to put down in 2 years. She said 6 more weeks and it's finally over. She said, he still doesn't know. And then she lowered her voice and she said, Danny, he can never know. Not until it's filed. I want you to understand where I was standing. The venue was paid in full. My mother had already taken that dress in at the waist twice, by hand, at her own kitchen table. My father's name was on the sign at the business I was going to bring this woman into. Her niece's report card was on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet from a hardware store. 43 days earlier, I had gotten down on one knee in a gravel lot at dusk, with a ring I paid off in 11 payments because I refused to put it on a card. And I put those 2 glasses down on the counter, and I picked them back up, and I walked out onto that patio, and I smiled at her, and I handed her the wine. That was the first lie I ever told her. It was not the last one, and it was not the worst thing I did. I spent the next 6 weeks trying to find out what she was hiding, instead of asking her. I found it. Every word of it. And I have never once, in 2 years, been able to forgive myself for how. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Marcus Rowe. I was 35 years old that summer, and I ran a heating and air company in Greensboro, North Carolina, that my father started in a rented bay off Randleman Road, with 1 van and a cousin who quit after 6 weeks. Clarence Rowe. His name is still on the sign, which is the only reason I have never changed it, even after the 2nd truck, and the 3rd, and the 11 employees, and the shop with the good roof. He died in the spring of my 30th year, sitting in a lawn chair watching my brother wash a company van, and the last thing he ever said to me was that I should stop looking at the numbers so much and go find somebody. He was not a subtle man. I met Simone Hale 18 months later at a hospital loading dock at 2 in the morning, which is the least romantic sentence I have ever had to say out loud. Their chiller had gone down on the 3rd floor and I took the call myself, because my night guy had a newborn. She came out of the double doors in scrubs with a cart of specimen trays and told me, without introducing herself, that if I did not get that unit running, she was going to lose 4 hours of lab draws and somebody's biopsy. She was a phlebotomy supervisor. She had been on shift since 2 the previous afternoon. She was not charming to me. She was efficient with me, which I would learn was how she loved people. I called that hospital 11 days later with a made-up reason and asked the front desk for the woman who ran the blood lab at night. That is the truth of how it started. We were together 2 years and 4 months before I proposed, and the reason it took that long is that Simone Hale did not hand her life over to anybody quickly. She had a sister she worried about. She had a mother she called every single evening at 7. She had a 9-year-old niece named Amaya who came to my shop on Saturdays and sat in the good chair in the office and did long division while I did invoices, and who once told my bookkeeper, very seriously, that she was there in a supervising capacity. I need to tell you about the 4 hours after that patio, because those 4 hours are the whole story. Everything that happened afterward was already decided in them. Danny left at 11. Simone came in, put the glasses in the sink, and stood behind me with her arms around my waist while I wiped the counter, and she said something about her cousin's +1, and she went up to bed. And I stood in that kitchen until 2 in the morning. I want to be honest with you about what was going through my head, because when people tell these stories later, they always make themselves calmer than they were. I was not calm. I ran through it the way you'd run through a bad noise in a compressor, and every path I took ended somewhere I could not stand. 6 more weeks, he still doesn't know. Not until it's filed. Filed. That was the word that did it. You file a petition. You file a claim. You file for divorce. And we weren't even married yet, so the only thing you could file 11 days before a wedding was something that made sure the wedding did not count. An annulment. A prenuptial thing her family had pushed. A lawsuit. And there was another shape to it that came to me around 1:30, sitting on my own kitchen floor, with my back against the dishwasher, and the shape was money. A woman marries into a business with 11 employees and a building and her name goes on things, and then 6 weeks later something gets filed and it's finally over. I could have gone upstairs. I have thought about that more than I have thought about anything else in my life. She was 30 feet above my head with her hair wrapped and her phone charging on my side of the bed because her cord was frayed, and I could have sat down on the edge of that mattress and said, "Simone, what is finally over in 6 weeks?" 8 words. That's all it would have taken. And instead, I went into the hall closet and got the tablet she used for streaming, the one that had been signed into her account since Christmas, and I sat in the dark and I opened her messages. Her messages were synced, 2 years of them, and I did not read them the way a man reads a letter. I read them the way an investigator reads a file, because that is what I had already decided I was. The first thing I found was a name I did not know. Lowell Pruitt. 41 calls in 9 weeks, and I counted them twice because I did not believe the number. Some of them at 6 in the morning. 2 of them after 11 at night, on nights I could account for, nights when she had told me she was going to her mother's and had come home at 11:40 with her mother's Tupperware in a grocery bag. There was one text thread with him, and it was almost nothing, which somehow made it worse. Confirming Thursday at 4. Yes, both documents. I'll have the letter. Please use this number, not the other one. The other number. That was the second thing. There was a second phone. She had referenced it in 3 separate threads across April and May. Use my other line. I'll call you from the other line. Don't text the other line after 9. I got up off that floor at 2:40 in the morning and went into the laundry room and stood on a plastic tote and reached up on the shelf above the dryer where we keep things nobody touches, and there was a shoebox, and in the shoebox under a folded pillowcase there was a plain gray prepaid phone. And it was warm, not hot. Warm the way something is warm when it has been on all day. I did not turn it on. I want credit for that, and I know I don't deserve any, but I did not turn it on. And I put it back exactly the way it was lying, and I went up the stairs and I got into bed next to her, and she rolled over in her sleep and put her hand flat on my chest the way she always did, right in the center, like she was checking something. And I lay there, under my fiancé's hand, with my heart going, and I understood that I was now a person who searched his own house at night. That was 10 days before I stood in front of 200 people and promised her everything I had. Here is where it stops being suspicion and starts being what I honestly believed was proof. And I need you to sit with these next few minutes, because if I had told you these things about a stranger, you would have believed them too. That is not an excuse. It is the reason I still can't sleep some nights. Every single piece of it fit. On the Thursday, 2 days after the patio, my bookkeeper knocked on the frame of my office door and stood there, the way she does when she has bad news she has already checked 3 times. Ardella Means has done our books since I was in high school. She had 2 canceled checks printed out from the bank portal, both drawn on the company operating account, both from the back of a checkbook we keep in the second drawer of the front desk. One for $1,800, one for $2,400. $4,200, cashed 6 weeks apart in March and April. The signature was a scribble that was trying to be mine and wasn't, and Ardella said, quietly, "Marcus, whoever did this had to be sitting at that desk." And I knew who had sat at that desk. Simone's older sister, Renee, had worked our phones for 11 weeks the summer before, because Simone asked me for a favor at her mother's dinner table with everybody listening, and I said yes before she finished the sentence. Renee was 37, funny in a way that made older men at the counter laugh out loud, and thin in a way that I had learned not to ask about. She had left the job in September without a conversation. I hadn't chased it. I'd told myself she got a better offer. But I did not think about Renee first. I want to be exact about this, because it is the thing I have to own. I sat in that office with those 2 pieces of paper, and the first face I saw was Simone's. Because on the 14th of May, according to the same bank portal, someone had made a $2,000 cash deposit into our night drop with no deposit slip and no note, and Ardella had booked it to miscellaneous income because she had nothing else to do with it. And Simone Hale had bought a used dryer that same week, in cash, and told me it cost $700. I sat there and I did arithmetic on my own family. $4,200 out, $2,000 back. Somebody was making a conscience payment and running out of time, and there were 6 weeks left, and then it would be filed, and then it would be finally over. We got married on a Saturday in the 3rd week of June, on a farm in Summerfield, with white chairs on grass that had been cut too short, and a barn full of string lights that my brother Andre and I hung ourselves the Thursday before. standing on the bed of truck 4, arguing about the spacing. $8,400 for that venue. I have the receipt. I know exactly what I paid to stand in that spot and lie. My mother walked her in. Simone's father passed when she was 19, and she had asked Dolores Rowe to do it about 4 months earlier. In our kitchen, casually, while looking in the refrigerator, and my mother had to leave the room. That morning, my mother came into the little side room where I was fixing my tie, and she put both her hands flat on my lapels and she said, "You look like your daddy." And then she looked at my face for about 3 seconds longer than she needed to, and she said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said the collar was tight. My mother is 71 years old, and she has never once been fooled by me, and she let it go anyway, which is a kind of love I did not deserve that day. Amaya was in a yellow dress, 9 years old, front tooth crooked, and she had been given the job of walking the rings up on a little pillow, and she took it so seriously that she practiced in the parking lot for 20 minutes. When she got to the front, she looked up at me and mouthed the words, "Did I do good?" And I nodded at her, and she exhaled like a woman getting off a double shift. And 30 seconds after that, I turned and watched Simone come up that aisle on my mother's arm, in a dress my mother had taken in twice by hand, and I said the words I had written on the back of an invoice in my truck, and I meant every single one of them, and I had a photograph on my phone at that moment of 2 canceled checks with my father's company name printed across the top, and a signature that wasn't mine. That is who I was. I want that on the record before anything else happens in this story. Not a man who was tricked, a man who stood in front of his mother and his brother and his 11 employees, and a 9-year-old in a yellow dress, and made a promise he was already running an investigation behind. We did not take a honeymoon. She said her leave got denied. I found out later that she never filed for it. 4 days after the wedding, I found the lease. It was not hidden well, which is a thing that should have told me something and didn't. It was in the accordion file where she kept her car title and her diplomas, folded once, and it was a 12-month residential lease for a 2-bedroom apartment at 1204 Dunmore Court, Unit 3B, on the east side of town, signed the previous November, in her name alone, $1,180 a month. She had moved into my house in January. I had helped carry a mattress. I had personally, with my own 2 hands, driven a load of her kitchen things to the Goodwill on Wendover because she said she was done with them. And this whole time, every month, $1,180 was going out of her account to a place I had never heard of, in a part of town she had no reason to be in, and I sat in my truck in the parking lot behind my own shop with that lease on the steering wheel, and I did the multiplication. 8 months, $9,440. On an apartment nobody lived in, except somebody lived in it. That was the thing, because the utilities were in her name too. I found the account online with an email she used for shopping, and that apartment had used 410 kilowatt hours the previous month. That is not an empty apartment. That is not a storage unit with the lights off. That is somebody running a refrigerator and a window unit and a television. My wife of 4 days was paying $1,180 a month to keep a stranger in a 2-bedroom on Dunmore Court. I drove out there on a Thursday evening at 7:15 and parked across the street under a pin oak, and I sat there for 2 hours and 11 minutes. 1204 Dunmore Court is a brick 2-story from the 1970s with 8 units, an iron rail up the middle stairs, and a strip of grass out front that somebody mows too close. 3B is upstairs on the right. The blinds were the cheap vinyl kind that the sun warps. And chained to the rail at the bottom of those stairs was a purple bicycle with a white basket on the front and streamers coming out of one handlebar grip, and it was a child's bicycle, and it was about the right size for a 9-year-old. I want to describe to you what that did to me, because it is the moment the whole thing turned, and it turned the wrong way. I did not think Amaya. I thought about Amaya for maybe 4 seconds, and then I threw it out, because Amaya lived with her mother in an apartment off Summit Avenue that I had personally driven to 11 or 12 times, and because the mind does something ugly when it has already picked a story. My story had a man in it. My story had a man in it since the night I counted 41 phone calls to Lowell Pruitt, and a bicycle on that rail did not mean my wife's niece to me. It meant somebody else's child. It meant a whole second household with a whole second life in it, running for 8 months, $1,180 a month, and a woman coming home to my bed at 11:40 at night with her mother's Tupperware in a grocery bag. At 9:26, a light came on behind those warped blinds in 3B. Nobody came out. I never saw a single person go in or out of that building the entire time I sat there. I drove home and my wife was on the couch with a heating pad on her lower back, and she asked me how the call went, and I told her the compressor was seized, and she said poor thing, and moved her feet so I could sit down. And I sat down. On my own couch, next to her. The next morning I drove to a store in a shopping center off Battleground Avenue, and I bought a tracking tag out of a rack by the register for $29. It came in a hard plastic clamshell that I could not open with my hands and had to cut with the utility knife from the glove box. There are things you do in these situations that you can explain to yourself, and things you can't. And I have found in 2 years that the line between them is not where you'd expect. Reading her messages, I can explain. Sitting outside that building, I can explain. But there is no version of me that gets to explain kneeling in my own driveway at 6:10 in the morning, with the birds going and the neighbor's sprinkler running, reaching up into the wheel well of my wife's car with a piece of black electrical tape, and putting a device up there so that a computer would tell me where she was for the rest of her life. I did that 8 days after I married her. She was asleep upstairs. I came back in and made coffee, and she came down in my sweatshirt and drank half of mine, and I watched her carry that cup out to a car I had bugged, and I told her to drive safe. For 9 days, I watched a dot. That is what I did with the first 2 weeks of my marriage. It went to the hospital. It went to her mother's on Bessemer. On the Tuesday and the Friday, it went to Dunmore Court and stayed for 2 hours and 40 minutes and 3 hours and 10 minutes. And on the second Saturday, it got on Interstate 40 westbound at 9 in the morning, and it did not stop until it was 91 miles away, in a town called Statesville, at an address that came up on my phone as a building with a state seal on the website and no photographs of the inside. She had told me she was going to a bridal shower for a coworker in Winston-Salem. 2 days later, I found the folded receipt in the console of her car. A motel off exit 151. 2 nights. 1 adult. Paid with a card I had never seen. We used a skip tracing outfit for our collections. Any business with receivables does. When somebody takes a $4,000 system on a payment plan, and then the phone stops working and the mail comes back, you hand it to a man like Ray Vollmer. Ray Vollmer was about 60, worked out of a suite above a tax preparer, and had a laminated sign on the door with a different company name than the one on his invoices. He had found people for me before. He was good at it in the way that a certain kind of man is good at things, which is that he never explained how, and he never asked why. I sat down across from him on the first Monday in July, with a folder in my hands, and I told him what I wanted, and I heard my own voice say the words, and it was steady. I gave him her full name, her date of birth, her plate, the Dunmore Court address, the name Lowell Pruitt. I told him I needed to know who lived in 3B, who Pruitt was, what was in Statesville, and whether there was a filing anywhere in the state with my wife's name on it. He wrote about 6 words down. He said it would be $1,200 and about 8 to 10 days, and he said, and I remember this exactly, he said, I'll canvass the associates. That's how these come apart. Somebody always talks. I said, okay. I want you to hear how ordinary that was. 2 men in a small room with a window unit going, and one of them says he's going to go ask the people around a woman some questions, and the other one says, okay, and writes a check. There was no moment in that room that felt like the moment. That's not how it works. That's what I've learned. The thing that ruins a child's life does not announce itself. It looks exactly like a man being practical on a Monday. Vollmer's first piece came back in 4 days, and it came back as a partial, and the partial was the worst possible thing he could have handed me because it confirmed the story I already had. He had found a storage unit. Cardinal Self-Storage off West Market, Unit 118, a 10 by 10, rented in her name in October, $89 a month, gate code accessed 19 times since March. And he had gotten a photograph, because Ray Vollmer was the kind of man who could get a photograph, and I have never asked myself hard enough how. Inside that unit, there was a dining set standing on end. There was a mattress in plastic. There were maybe 30 cardboard boxes, and on the side of 4 of them, in black marker, in handwriting I did not recognize, it said Amaya, room. I sat in my truck outside of Food Lion and looked at that photograph for a long time. Here is what I built out of it, and here is where I need you to see how a reasonable man goes completely wrong. I did not see a child's bedroom in storage and think, something has happened to that child's home. I thought, she is moving her sister and her niece into that apartment. I thought, she has been assembling a second household, piece by piece, for 9 months, since 2 months before she moved in with me. I thought, the wedding was never the destination. The wedding was the last thing she needed from me, before whatever gets filed in 6 weeks. And I thought, sitting in a grocery store parking lot with my hands on the wheel of a truck with my dead father's name on the door, she used my mother's hands to take that dress in. That was Thursday. Vollmer said he'd have Pruitt and Statesville by the middle of the following week. I had 11 days until the date I had counted off from that patio, and I could not wait 11 days. And that is the part I would trade my hands to take back. Because on the Friday morning, I walked into the break room at my own shop, and I asked a question of a man who was eating a sandwich. His name was Dwayne. He'd been with us 5 years. Good installer, slow talker, kept a spotless truck, sent his money home to his mother in Danville. I want to say clearly that Dwayne never did one thing wrong in his life as far as I know. And he has no idea to this day what he handed me, and I have never told him. I was standing at the microwave and he was at the table, and I said, "Hey, you know the East Side better than me. Dunmore Court, off Holden, that a decent building over there. 8 units, brick?" And Dwayne chewed for a second and said he wasn't sure, but his people were all over that side, he'd ask around. That's it. That's the whole thing. 9 seconds. I did not know that Dwayne's last name was Boyce. I mean, I knew it. It was on a payroll sheet I signed every 2 weeks. I just did not know it. The way you don't know things until they cost you. And I did not know that a man named Kelvin Boyce, 40 years old, was Dwayne's first cousin on his father's side. And I did not know, I would not know for another 19 days, that Kelvin Boyce was Amaya's father, that there was a protective order against him out of Guilford County District Court, that he had not been permitted within 1,000 feet of that child since February, and that the single thing standing between him and her was the fact that nobody in his family knew where she slept at night. Dwayne asked around. Of course he did. I asked him to. He was being helpful, on a Friday, over a sandwich, for his boss. Vollmer called me on the following Tuesday and gave me the rest of it in about 90 seconds, in the flat voice of a man reading from notes, and it did not land the way I expected. Lowell Pruitt was a licensed clinical social worker. He had a private practice and he contracted with a licensed child placing agency, and the thing he did for a living was write assessments, home studies, and the building in Statesville with the state seal was a residential treatment facility, and Vollmer had a visitor log entry, and my wife had signed into it 9 times since February, and the patient she signed in to see was Renee Hale. I sat with the phone against my ear, and something in my chest started to come apart, because for about 40 seconds I could see it. I could nearly see it. Her sister was in treatment, there was a social worker, there was a child's room in boxes, and then Vollmer said one more thing, still flat, still reading, and it slammed the door. He said, "There's a petition, filed in April, Guilford County, special proceedings. It's a sealed adoption matter, so I can't pull the file, but your wife's name is on it as petitioner, and there's a hearing set for the 24th. The 24th, 6 weeks and 1 day, after a Tuesday night in June, with 2 glasses of wine in my hands. And here is what my mind did with that, and I have gone over it 10,000 times, and I still cannot fully account for it. Except to say that a man who has spent 6 weeks building a case does not let go of it when the evidence changes. He bends the evidence. I thought, adoption. She is adopting Amaya. She is adopting a child, and she has kept it from me through our entire engagement, through our wedding day, and she is keeping a separate residence and a separate phone and a separate life on the east side of town. And there is a reason she has done all of that without me. And the reason has to be that I am not part of what comes next. She was not building a family with me. She was building one that did not have me in it. And she needed 6 more weeks of my name on a marriage license and my house on her paperwork, and then it would be filed, and then it would be finally over. I got that phone call at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. At 10:40 the next morning, the dot on my phone stopped at a county building, and I was 11 minutes away, and I went. It was a squat brick building with a flag out front and a parking lot with cracks in it that had grass coming up. Her car was in the second row. I parked 4 spaces down, and I sat there, and I did not have a plan, which people never believe, but I didn't. At 11:50, she came out of those doors with a folder against her chest, and there was a woman with her, older, gray locks pulled back, badge on a lanyard, a caseworker. I would learn her name was Yvette Kinner, and they were standing at the bottom of the steps finishing a conversation, and I got out of my truck. I have watched myself walk across that parking lot 1,000 times. I know what my hands were doing. I know that Simone saw me at about 20 feet and that her whole face went, in 1 second, from tired to something I had never seen on her, and it was not guilt. I have had 2 years to understand that it was not guilt. It was terror, and it was not terror of me. I said her name, and then I said, in a voice that carried across a county parking lot to a woman with a badge on a lanyard, I said, "Whose apartment is it, Simone?" 1204 Dunmore. I've been out there. I know about the phone. I know about Pruitt. I know about the money. I know about the 24th. Just tell me who he is. Nobody spoke for about 3 seconds. Then Ms. Kinner said, very quietly, "Mrs. Rowe, is this your husband?" And Simone said yes. And Ms. Kinner said, "I'm going to need you to come back inside." She came home at 4 that afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table. She put her keys in the bowl the way she did every day of our life together, and she stood on the other side of that table with her hands on the back of a chair, and she was not crying, and she did not raise her voice one time. She said, "I cannot tell you." She said, "I am asking you for 18 days. She said, "On the 24th I will sit down in this kitchen, and I will tell you every single thing, and you can hate me for all of it, and I will not argue with one word of it. But there are 18 days, and there is a child on the other end of them, and I need you to be a man who can be told nothing and still hold still." And I said, and I need to say this out loud, because I have never said it in front of anybody. I said, "Was he ever in this house?" And she looked at me for a long moment, and she said, "Marcus." And she went upstairs. She slept in the guest room. For the next 3 nights, we moved around that house, like 2 people in a museum. She left for work. She called her mother at 7. On the Saturday, she went out at 9 in the morning with a paper grocery bag and came back at 1, and I checked the dot, and it had been at Dunmore Court, and I sat in my office, and I opened Vollmer's file again, and I emailed him, and I asked him for one more thing. I asked him to find out who else was on that lease application as a reference or an emergency contact. He answered me on Sunday afternoon with a single line and a scanned page. The emergency contact on the lease application for 1204 Dunmore Court, Unit 3B, was Renee Hale. And the relationship field said, "Sister." I read that on Sunday. On Monday night, at 10:11, a man stood at the bottom of an iron stairway on the east side of Greensboro and looked up at a purple bicycle chained to the rail. I was not there. Everything I know about the 21st of July I know from a police report, a court transcript, and one conversation with a woman named Eunice Hale, who is my ex-mother-in-law, and who has been kinder to me than I have any right to expect. Amaya was in the second bedroom, asleep, with a fan going. Simone was on the couch with the television on low, and she had been staying there 4 nights a week since February. He came up the stairs and he did not knock. The door at 3B had a deadbolt and a chain, and one of those bar braces that wedges against the floor, and Simone Hale had installed all 3 of them herself in November with a drill she borrowed from my shop, and I remember her borrowing it, and I remember asking what she was hanging, and I remember her saying, "A shelf." The report says he was at that door for somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. It says the frame split at the strike plate and the brace held. It says a neighbor in 1A called at 10:14, and a unit arrived at 10:21, and he was gone. It says a 9-year-old female occupant was located in the rear bedroom, awake, unharmed. Unharmed. That word is in a police report about a child, and it is the only mercy in this entire story, and I did not earn any part of it. The brace earned it. A woman with a borrowed drill earned it. They picked him up 2 days later at his mother's house in Reedsville. He had known that address for 11 days. He told an officer he heard it from family. He said it the way you'd say you heard where a party was. 11 days before the 21st of July was the 10th. On the 10th of July, I stood at a microwave in my own break room and asked a man eating a sandwich about a brick building on the east side. The hearing on the 24th did not happen the way anybody planned, and I am going to explain the machinery of it, because for 2 years people have told me I am carrying something that isn't mine, and the machinery is how I know that it is. In North Carolina, before a court finalizes an adoption, certain things have to be in place. The petition has to have been on file long enough. The child has to have been in the petitioner's physical custody long enough. Every required consent or relinquishment has to be filed, and the window to take it back has to have closed. And there has to be an assessment on file, written by somebody like Lowell Pruitt, that reports on the petitioner's household, her marital status, her family status, who lives in that home, and the criminal history of every adult who lives in it. The court has to have read that assessment and considered it. Not a version of it, a current one. On the 8th of April, when that petition was filed, the household in that assessment was 1 adult and 1 child. On the 22nd of June, I married her. That changed the household. It changed the assessment. Simone knew it would, and her attorney knew it would, and the plan, the entire plan behind the phone and the lease and the second address and the $1,180 a month was that her legal residence would not change until after the decree, so that nothing had to be reopened, so that a 9-year-old would not have to wait another 4 months while paperwork caught up with a wedding. That was the secret. That was the whole terrible secret. 6 more weeks and it's finally over meant 6 more weeks of paying rent on an apartment so a child could stay where she was. And I blew it apart in 9 days. Her husband was on the record now as a man who had hired an investigator to locate her residence. Her husband had been served notice in a district court matter that his statement was required. The other side's attorney had a protective order violation, a compromised address, an emergency placement review, and an undisclosed change in household composition, and he did not have to be clever with any of it. The decree did not get signed on the 24th. On the 25th, a 9-year-old girl was placed temporarily with a licensed family in another county because the address where she had been safe was no longer a secret, and nobody could say yet whose fault that was. 71 days. That is how long she was there. She started the 4th grade in a school where nobody knew her name. I sat in a courtroom on the 4th floor of a building downtown on a Wednesday in August, in a suit I had bought for my father's funeral. They asked me 11 questions. I remember 4 of them. They asked whether I resided at the address listed on the marriage license. They asked whether my wife resided there. They asked whether I had, at any time, retained the services of any individual or firm for the purpose of locating the residence of Simone Hale Rowe. And they asked whether I had, on or about the 10th of July, discussed the location of that residence with any person. I said yes. I said yes twice. And then a man in a gray suit asked me to state the name of the person with whom I had discussed it, and I said the name of one of my own employees, out loud in a courtroom, and a court reporter typed it, and it is in a record somewhere in Guilford County forever, next to a child's name. Nobody yelled at me. That's the thing nobody tells you about these rooms. Nobody yelled. The judge asked me one question directly, near the end, and she asked it without any edge in her voice at all. She said, "Mr. Rowe, did you ever ask your wife what she was doing?" And I stood in a courtroom in my father's funeral suit, and I said, "No, ma'am." Simone was 4 seats to my left. She had a folder. She did not look at me, and she did not look away from me. She just kept her eyes forward, and I watched the side of her face, and I understood something that I have not been able to unlearn since. Everything I had spent 6 weeks proving was true. Every single fact in Ray Vollmer's file was accurate. The lease was real. The phone was real. The money was real. The 41 calls were real. The petition was real. I had assembled a completely correct set of facts and built out of them a story that was wrong in every way a story can be wrong. And it cost 71 days out of a child's life. And there was never a moment where the facts would have stopped me. Only a question would have. 8 words. On a Tuesday, at the top of a staircase. The decree was signed on a Friday, in the first week of March the following year. 226 days later than it should have been. Amaya Hale. She took her mother's name, which was her aunt's name, which is the same name, and I think about that a lot. Renee finished her program in October and relapsed in November and went back in January, and somewhere in there, with everything on fire, she had the option to take back what she had signed, and she did not take it back. I have never met a stronger person in my life, and I spent 2 years quietly deciding she was a thief. She was, technically. She took $4,200 out of the back of a checkbook at my front desk in the spring, and Simone found out about it in May and started paying it back $2,000 at a time into a night drop with no note on it, because she knew exactly what would happen if it came to me. A pending charge against Renee in the middle of that petition. My mother knowing, my family knowing, that was the other half of it. Renee had agreed to sign on one condition, and the condition was that nobody in the Rowe family ever heard about the checks, and Simone kept that promise to her sister at a cost I still cannot calculate, and she was 17 days from the end of it when she poured 2 glasses of wine on my patio. She moved out in the first week of October, while Amaya was still in the other county. She did not take anything that wasn't hers. She left the dryer. North Carolina requires a year of separation before you can be granted an absolute divorce. So we waited. That is a strange sentence, but that's what it is. 2 people who no longer spoke waited out a calendar. And on the 6th of October the following year, in the same courthouse, a petition was filed. 15 months after I stood in a kitchen with 2 glasses of wine in my hands and heard a woman say the word filed and built an entire apocalypse out of it. She was right, in the end. In 6 more weeks it was finally over. She just didn't know what she was talking about, and I did. There is one more thing and then I'm done. In the spring of this year, Eunice Hale called my mother, and my mother called me, and I drove over to a house on Bessemer Avenue that I had eaten 40 dinners in and sat on a plastic-covered sofa while a 74-year-old woman brought me a shoebox. She said Simone had left some things there when she moved and she'd been going through them and she found something with my name on it. And she thought about it for 2 weeks before she called. Inside was a plain white envelope, sealed, and on the front, in blue pen, it said, Marcus, for after, and under that the date, July the 5th. July the 5th was 16 days before a man came up those stairs. It was 5 days before I stood at a microwave. It was written the week Ray Vollmer took my $1,200. She had written it and sealed it and put it in her mother's house so that it existed no matter what happened to her. And it was 2 pages long, and I am not going to read you all of it. But she explained the whole thing, in order, the way you'd explain it to somebody you had already decided to keep. And near the bottom of the second page, she wrote about the assessment, about the household, about the checks on all adults in the home, and she wrote, I know what you're thinking about that year you were 19. I already told them. I told them you were 19, and your brother was on the ground outside a gas station, and you did what a brother does, and it went on a piece of paper. Lowell wrote it down in February. It was never a problem, Marcus. You were never the problem. The only thing I did not have was time. And the last line of that letter, the last thing Simone Hale ever wrote to me, was this. When you read this, it will be over, and I will be able to answer anything you want to ask me. Please have questions. Please, baby, have questions. Amaya turned 11 in April. There's a photograph of her in a green graduation gown from a 5th grade ceremony that my mother has on her refrigerator, and I have never asked how it got there. I still have the magnet from the hardware store. It's in a drawer, in a kitchen, in a house I live in by myself, and the report card came down a long time ago, and every few weeks I take that magnet out and hold it, and it weighs nothing, and I put it back. 8 words, at the top of a staircase. On a Tuesday in June, I have told this story out loud 4 times in 2 years. Once to my mother, at her kitchen table, with the same sewing basket sitting on the end of it that she used to take that dress in. Once to my brother, in a truck, at night, badly. Once to a therapist in an office off Wendover who charged me $110 a session to tell me the same thing my father would have told me for free. And once now, to you. And every single time I get to the same place, and the place is not the parking lot, and it is not the courtroom, and it is not the letter. It is a staircase in a house I still live in, at 2 in the morning, with a woman asleep at the top of it, who had already told the truth about me to a stranger with a clipboard, and a man at the bottom of it choosing a folder over a question. So if you take one thing out of the last hour, let it be this, and let it be smaller than you want it to be. The people around you are almost never doing the thing you have decided they are doing. They are usually carrying something heavier than the thing you suspect, and they are usually carrying it partly for you, and the reason they have not told you is almost never the reason you have already assigned to them. You do not need a file, you do not need a tracker in a wheel well, or a man in an office above a tax preparer, or 6 weeks of proof. You need 8 words, and you need to be able to stand in the silence after them. And that is the whole skill. That is all of it. I did not have it. I would give this house to have it. And now I want to hear from you, because I have carried this by myself for long enough. Tell me in the comments, honestly, was I a man protecting his family, or was I a man who destroyed one? Would you have gone up those stairs that night, or would you have opened that tablet the way I did? And has somebody in your own life ever kept a secret from you that turned out to be a kindness you couldn't see yet? I read the comments. I read all of them. Whatever you say the true version. If this story held you, do me one small favor before you go. Hit that like button, because it genuinely helps this story reach the next person who needs to hear it. And there is somebody out there tonight sitting in a dark kitchen with a phone in their hand, about to start building a case against somebody who loves them. Maybe this reaches them in time. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on that bell, because we tell one of these every week. Real people, real rooms, real decisions that could not be taken back. Then let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. Take care of the people who are keeping something from you. Sometimes they're keeping it for you. I'll see you in the next one.